Welcome to Emotional Sobriety, the next step in recovery, with Dr. Alan Berger and Tom Rutledge.
Tom's nutshell is rigorous honesty begins at home. Tom, what were you thinking when you wrote that?
I wrote that one yesterday, and just shows you, And once I finished it, I just said, well, that's a good day's work. If we're not really observant, and if we're not really open to people's feedback, also, then we're likely not to have the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth about ourselves. So it's just a reminder. Don't forget to check at home.
I really see my sobriety and my emotional sobriety, my whole sobriety about being grounded in reality. And I think people that, fall prey to drugs or other higher powers want certainty, want one truth.
Yeah.
And the reality is the universe is governed by order and chaos, sort of a yin and a yang of both. And I've got to accept that at home, right? I talk about how I speak pluralism, and in the back of my mind, I'm AA's compliance officer. That's not what GSO should be doing. You shouldn't be saying that in this meeting. Did you hear what that group is doing over there? They need this and not that. And we have no rules. Why am I trying to enforce them?
Well, see, I noticed this dialogue because you externalize that dialogue that you have with yourself, Joe, all the time. Is that moderating voice is strong?
Yeah.
The one that the proselytizing, I know everything voice, because you're aware of how strong that one is. You're always meeting it with the other side.
Right.
Well, I want to, right? To me, that is emotional sobriety, is to go, I don't agree with you at all, and I love you and appreciate you. And if I have curiosity and positive regard, I can learn from you, right? I have my preferences. I don't watch a sporting event and not care what the outcome is, or I wouldn't watch the sporting event, right? I'd do something else, right? That's the whole truth for me. Is I do have my preferences. I'm just one vote, one voice, one person in a world that has a lot of variety to it.
Right.
Yeah, I have the natural tendency to cast myself as the hero always.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just
Sure.
built into me. And
Any
so,
triangle.
yeah. But I mean, the only times I think I've approached heroism is when I've been able to decouple that a little bit and just kind of look at things, look at myself and my actions in relation to this world that I'm trying to develop harmony with. And
One of the things that I've been so aware of is just over talking. I remember when I was in graduate school, we had this class. I can't remember what the program was, but it was a program on learning to be in relationship to another person. God, they had a name for it, and they were using it a lot to teach therapists, beginning therapists, how to stay in rhythm with another person. It was very interesting. And one of the exercises is everybody, you'd pair off in dyads, right? And then you'd overtalk each other and just purposely do it. And it was a very interesting experiment because it really showed you how important, and this as a musician, Joe, is a space between notes. And sometimes if I'm excited about something, I'll jump in and take away that space because I want to say something. But I realize that when you remove the space, you remove the music.
Yeah. Alan, I suppose one of the places I learned that was when I was doing all those radio interviews back in the 1900s.
Back to this topic of rigorous honesty, it is something, when I look back over my experience in recovery, which now, as we were talking about days, God, it's over 5 decades, it's like, wow, 5 decades. That seems ominous to me. It's like, wow. But what I realize is honesty for me has been so relative to my emotional maturity. See, so when I think I was being honest with myself at certain points, I was being honest as my emotional maturity and consciousness could support at the time. I'm convinced today that our level of emotional maturity creates our consciousness. Our consciousness is very much tied to our development, where we're at in our developmental process. We see that very clearly with Piaget's work with kids that are when he was studying their cognitive development and how consciousness was so much influenced and really a reflection of that kid's cognitive development. And I think today my consciousness is a reflection of my emotional maturity or my emotional sobriety. That says that, for me, when I look back, stuff I thought I was really honest with myself about, there was some honesty to it. There was a partial truth to it. But today, those truths are so much more profound. They're so much deeper and rooted in awareness and insight and wisdom
Yeah.
versus some of the other ones were more superficial. Like it took all, like I remember coming in the program, it was all I could do to understand being powerless over alcohol. I mean, that was about it.
Yeah.
The way I was dishonest with myself, how emotionally mature I was, that stuff was beyond my grasp in any way at that time. It started to change very slowly as the more time I started to accumulate. But it when I look back, my goodness, what a difference.
Yeah. Well, how
What
that
a
changes is really interesting, and you can do it with. I'm just because something Patrick said. I'm thinking of doing it with hindsight. When he said, "I always like to cast myself as the hero." I mean, you're not the Lone Ranger with that one, and I was always the white hat as far as I could. But I look back with history rather than beating myself up with history. Looking back at times in my life when I cast myself as the white hat. And no, that hat would have been dingy gray at best, and but I what I know about that is that and it helps me in talking to other people because I don't see people, they're not lying to me. It goes to this nutshell. They're not being honest with themselves yet. And it's because they don't have that information because I mean, because I really did see myself as that hero. Even though if I look at it now, I go, well, no, I'm just kind of the problem.
I like you quote the source, and we know why you use the term rigorous honesty because that's where it comes from. But can we talk about this word rigorous? What other honesty is there? Where, where did that word come from, right? Like, and and
That's a good point.
we need maybe in early recovery more binary sort of thinking. It's right or it's wrong, the truth and not the truth, right? But in emotional sobriety, as our sobriety progresses, it becomes more of a spectrum, right? A sort of a
Yes.
range of things.
Great.
Because you say one more thing, because you bring up a thing where we're talking to each other, or and then you say, "Let me be honest with you," and then you immediately go like, "What the hell have you been doing for the last decade?" I mean, what have you? Are we now starting to be honest? But it's because I think we do see it in gray
Yeah. So the definition of rigorous is extremely thorough,
and clear. Yeah.
exhaustive,
Yes.
and accurate.
Right. And getting clear, there's a lot of work to be done on that front in early sobriety and emotional sobriety. Just, figuring out how to tell what honest is when you're looking at it.
One of the later definitions is harsh and demanding. Rigorous, right? Yeah, this is the rigorous
Mean. Yeah.
exercise routine, right? A harsh and demanding routine. It's so interesting that when you start looking at the definition of things, another meaning of rigorous is strictly applied to or adhered to.
Mm-hmm.
Strictly.
That sounds scary.
Yeah, doesn't it?
Exactly as written.
Inflexibly to adhering strictly or inflexibly to a belief, opinion, or a way of doing something. Inflexibly. So, it does raise the question about, is honesty, and this is a very interesting thing. I saw this in the 70s, There was a very, very strong movement, especially in the field of recovery, especially certain approaches to drug addiction, to do these very harsh confrontations with people, like in Synanon, right? Daytop is another program that comes to
Intervention.
mind. Well, they called it usually giving somebody a haircut, is what they called it. Oh, Joe, they'd have a
Wow.
field day with you, buddy. Joe, they would really get,
Mm.
boy, can you imagine you getting a haircut? So, so what happened is they just really, you're so selfish, self-centered. And some people could take that in that were ready to face that about themselves. Other people decompensated under that kind of
Right.
confrontation.
Some people benefited from it. The guy who trained me in my first job as a group therapist, he was a little guy and he was tough as hell and he was funny as hell. But he would literally get out of his chair and jump up and down in front of people with his finger in their face. And these were pretty hardcore drunks and addicts. But so some of them really appreciated it. But what back then they were training us all that way, and so that's one of the places where I realized that ain't me. It's like I'm not even credible if I'm trying to do it.
So sometimes our mind is not ready to see the truth.
That's right.
You see, I think that that's the other thing, and that's what a skilled therapist understands, is that, sometimes we have to inch our way towards that truth, right? So that we develop. See, and becomes a very important topic when we think about rigorous honesty. Can I support my honesty with myself? Now, what does that mean to support it? It means, can I face this issue and stand in the face of that truth without turning against myself
Yeah.
or blaming someone else? See, that's the challenge, because if I can face it, and that's what we're talking about, is a level of acceptance, right? Which is facing a truth, standing in the face of that truth and allowing yourself to experience what it means to you. I think that's a great definition of acceptance. There are times when I wasn't ready to face certain truths about myself because I didn't have the ability to support myself. This came home to me when I did my internship at Fairfield Hills Hospital. I worked with the very, very severely disturbed people, right? I mean, some of these people had spent the better part of their life in a mental institution, and it was in Connecticut. These were state hospitals, right?
Mhm.
And what I saw is that these people did not have enough self-esteem to face what was really going on with them. And it's funny, is that's why we say in the program more will be revealed, because as our self-esteem grows, we can see things and be honest about things that we couldn't be before. Be honest with ourselves about. The way I say it is, only the best in us can see the worst in us. But that best in us is a gradual process to get to the point where I can really be that honest and see some really shitty behavior on my part,
Yeah.
so that I don't decompensate with that. And I've seen that happen. I think you did too, Tom. When someone
Yeah,
gets confronted,
absolutely, and thank God for my. I mean, I've complained about it the whole time, but thank God for my experiences in state hospitals. It's like, I mean, you just really go to the depths of that stuff. I want to go back to what you said a minute ago about the same thing that goes for those of us that are therapists, but this is also since in AA we're helping each other. It applies to everybody. It's like I know that I went through a phase as a helper that that I've eventually identified as I made the assumption that everybody either wanted to or needed to get to the same level of insight I had, you know. Now, keep in mind, by me saying that now in 2026, I was limited in my insight. Okay. But but the truth is I found myself pushing things onto people that exactly what you're saying, Alan, that now I can look and go like, they didn't need to hear this. They didn't, and it isn't dishonesty, because what you just said is I couldn't see it from there.
And maybe we could use this to segue. the level of truth that I was prepared to accept at a certain point of my life was I spent 3 years in therapy, just struggling to get the lid of the box open on I'm an alcoholic, and I'm powerless over that, and I need to deal with that before anything else can be addressed. And I would show up to therapy every single week. Sometimes I'd show up loaded, sometimes I'd show up late, but week after week after week after week in denial of that, and my therapist patiently coaxing me, doing everything she could do to get me to, confront that fact. And, for a while, I look back and as I started to get more and more sober, I had a lot of shame and just resentment. And looking back at that guy, like, what an idiot, like I just wasn't, or, look at how weak I was, or look at how stupid I was to just sit there. And was I wasting my time? I wasn't getting anything, obviously. I just wasn't prepared to see the truth. But uh, it takes time for that to cook. I guess that's just what I learned, is that, like, I just could not see it, or I did not have eyes to see it. But that's a process that it takes a while, and it takes a lot of attention, and hopefully you live long enough to uh, be able to see certain
Yeah.
truths.
Well, idiocy, like everything else, is relative. It's like I often refer to myself as a recovering alcoholic and a recovering idiot, and but the truth is, it's like what you're describing is we can't really qualify. I don't define what you're describing as idiocy because you weren't there yet. I think this is one of the things that it's kind of a trick that gets played on people with in get into recovery or therapy of any kind. It's like find the hidden picture. When you can't see it, you can't see it, you can't see it. But then when you see it, you cannot unsee it, and that's when you move up a level. It's like now it doesn't mean I can't still be stupid and make mistakes, but it became harder and harder and harder for me to do that without knowing I was doing it.
And thank God for that. Before we wrap up, we've got a little bit of time. Just wanted to speak to the side of the coin on relapse that belongs to the loved ones of the relapser, or the supporters of the one
Yeah.
who relapsed. And last week we talked through that process of what the reservation, and the things that drive us to use again after we know that we can't. So yeah, and I suppose this brushes against Al-Anon a little bit, is emotional sobriety and supporting and understanding relapse. Does anything come to mind for you guys about that?
For me, I think people learn quicker in Al-Anon about the universe just isn't guided by structure and order alone. There's also chaos in the way that I can't control everything about my addiction. As an Al-Anon, as someone who loves another person suffering with addiction, I can't, you can't do A and B and be guaranteed C. You can do A and B because it's the right thing to do, but it isn't always going to be C. Every journey is individual. And when Tom was talking about the intervention period, the sort of tough love, that also, that whether that was order or chaos, it had an influence on more asset-based psychology, more positive psychology. Well, what's going right for you? Let's focus on that, as opposed to what's wrong with you, how are you deficient, all deficit-based approaches to
Yeah.
recovery. And, in the middle of addiction, you can still find some like self-will is no good, but we still need our will, right? We just need to a balance of these things, right? A person has some desire, even though they're falling prey to another desire, right? They have a desire, that in between place where Dr. Bob described it as desiring to have the desire to be sober. And we
Yeah.
can work with people there, and it'll progress in a positive way, but we can't control that.
Well, the other piece is, I just want to say this because I think this is just a general, I get this out of all of this conversation. And that is, I wrote down, what is the reason to identify everything we don't control? It's not to focus there. It's to say, then now I can streamline my way of going through life, which I feel like I have, and to a certain degree, where I really can get up every day and focus on the things I do control. That I do, my mind, my way of looking at things and my decisions. And it's like, it's that's another thing too. I mean, because I think we could all do that. Amazing how much stuff and I can still do it, but how much stuff in my life I have just put lots of energy into trying to change that I never had any control over.
And the essence of what we're getting at about relapse is that we do not control what that person does, and we can fall into a trap if we start thinking that we can pull that lever, or that we do have some direct bearing over whether or not that person picks up again, or when they pick up, what happens to them. So it's more about influence than control, maybe, or you know
Well,
that
and
loving,
the
gentle
fact that
presence.
with Al-Anon, the fact is that, because I had somebody in my office just the other day, we were talking about this, is like the idea that you're right, you cannot control that other person, no matter how much you love them, how much you want to do that. But that is all. This is the harder part. That is not a negative reflection on you. None. If we join the club. None of us can control other people, places, or circumstances.
Well,
We can
that's what I
we can
yeah.
influence, but we do not have control.
See, I think that for that person that, it varies, right? Early on in recovery, there's the experience of a relapse in a family is going to be much more devastating. Not that it's not always devastating, but, as someone starts to grow along these lines, people do mature, which means they are more differentiated. And so later on, there can be a lot of compassion about somebody relapsing, and for that person to be met with a lot of love and concern. Because trust me, one of the things we see with people that have got some time that go out, their shame and self hate is so great that there's a high incidence of suicide. People don't come back from that. People hate themselves and they've lost so much face that they go ahead and take their lives because they just can't face that reality, as though somehow it's a reflection of who they're not, right? That somehow they've failed. I just love Bill's attitude about it, man. It's so much more accepting. He says, God, if that happens, let's not get caught up in terms of, what's wrong with you, but what's needed. What do you need to do to have a better foundation? What happened here? Let's try to understand it. So that's the approach. And it comes back to this thing of not taking it personally if somebody relapses. How could you do this to me? It's not about you. It's about them. And yes, it's going to have an impact on the family. Of course it is. Whenever a member in a family is in trouble or struggling, it's going to create a lot of concern and anxiety and things like that. But once again, the problem isn't the problem. The problem is how we meet it. And there's ways people can meet relapse that can, can, believe it or not, enhance that person's recovery and their chance of recovery. There's other ways where you can become a part of the problem.
Well,
And see
in
that.
that way, Alan, I've told one person in particular who was very, very far, many years into recovery, who relapsed, who had much of that the total despair that you're talking about. And one of the things I could honestly say to him, it was at one point in the process, was I said, it's like I always believe it's better to have to learn from other people's near death experiences, so I don't have to have my own. And I just told him, I said, I have learned so much from watching you do this, because, and I made this really clear to him. And I think any one of the four of us could do that. It's like, I do not see myself as different from that. I do not see myself as not having that vulnerability. It's like, I mean, because I've seen too often where overconfidence there is what sets us up. So it's like, I can be sitting there talking to somebody who's relapsed and go like, I'm not different from you. I may be more fortunate today, but it's like, you're teaching, you're learning, and you're teaching me.
I was comparing the Great Britain AA membership survey to the AA survey for members in Canada, USA. And they ask, like we do, how long since your last drink? But they also ask, how long have you been on the recovery path? And because those are both useful. Like someone who is only 3 months sober, but has been around the rooms for 20 years, has a lot of wisdom to offer that isn't lost. And I think that's a better way
I
to
like that.
sort of measure ourselves in terms of, because
Yeah. No,
I
you're
hate
right. Yeah.
seeing the self-loathing people have when they come back because they feel they've betrayed themselves.
When you're right, it's not an etch a sketch. Recovery's not etch a sketch. You don't lose all that you've learned and stuff when you relapse. And so many people feel it. That's that level of maturity again that comes with this black and white thinking, this absolute thinking. I'm either okay or I'm not okay. And that's, like
Yeah,
you said, Joe, that when you
absolutely.
start looking that we're all on a spectrum, and all the time that sometimes I'm a little more okay or I'm a little less okay, but it's not a black and white deal at all. I love Jelly Roll's song, right? I'm not okay
I'm
and
not
that's
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
okay and that's okay. He's getting to that.
We were talking about how I noticed on my AA Grapevine app that I was 18,000 days sober. But imagine if I had to measure how long I've been emotionally sober. Like that'd be hours,
You need
not
a
years.
stopwatch. Yeah.
We've got to invent that watch that tells you how many steps you took. That reflects how much emotional sobriety you had through the course of today.
Yeah, since your last righteous indignation.
Uh, I'll be
That
the
was-
first to get a sober watch. Yeah.
No,
No, I just want.
there's a Kramer thing with this on Seinfeld where he's trying to do something. He goes like, "Okay, starting now," and he's always screwing it up.
We're 40 Publishing, which publishes my book. We're coining a new phrase. We're calling it emotional sobriety assisted recovery.
I go to pretty much one meeting a week now. It's my men's stag, and I really love it. And the birthdays I've been noticing the last few weeks, the ones taking their cake, definitely spend a little time on their share talking about the dirty chips they've taken and about their relapse and kind of like some early like massive stumbles that they took. And just in like talking to you guys this morning, it just really like occurred to me how important that is to like the new people in the room, because I certainly looked at, especially in the early days, as at the ones taking their cakes, especially cakes for like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, as like just this unimpeachable ideal. And like I really looked up to those guys and stuff. But like I think it really, to see those relapses and stumbles as like an essential part of the continuum, not, and not like taking that burden of shame, from the people that are in that place, I think is so helpful. I mean, I have to imagine. I mean, it certainly meant a lot to me back then, and still, relapse is part of recovery, and it's not the end of the story. It's just all we get's a daily reprieve, right? And anything else, fellas?
No, you guys are a good show. Joe, thanks again for joining us.